Don't spill your coffee up here.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to see everybody. All right, so we're getting close to the end of our series here, and we haven't sung one of my favorite hymns yet. So I don't know if this necessarily connects to the lesson today, but we're going to sing it just because I love to. Now, I've introduced this one to you before, but how many of you all are friends of are fans of the old Andy Griffith show? Yeah. So this is my favorite hymn, or one of my favorite hymns, because if you ever watch the Andy Griffith Show, whenever they sing a hymn, if they're ever in church or they're ever having a special program, unless it's like a Christmas thing or something like that, the hymn they always sing is hymn number 446, "Leaning on the Everlasting Arms." I don't know if it was Andy Griffith's favorite show hymn, or if it was one of the producers, but whatever it was, this is one of their favorites. I'm gonna get walleye vision watching all today. Y'all like spread out on this side of this. We need to move into the middle here a little bit. I know, but everybody's got their own seats. But anyway, let's stand up. Let's sing together. Hymn number 446. leaning on the everlasting arms. Great job, everybody. Please have a seat. Thank you, Jay. Let's give him a hand before you stand. There we go. That's the piano on the left. All right. Well, this morning it is a pleasure not only to come together for our PBS study, which we will be. He's still running up and down the halls. Did y'all see it? It's my pleasure not only to come together and be here for PBS, but this morning I also have the pleasure of introducing you to one of our mission partners who has been with us this week. As a matter of fact, he has been with me at every Bible study that I've led this week. And he asked me earlier, says, how many of these Bible studies, small groups do you do? I said, well, you've been to all of them this week. But Russell Barton is one of our mission partners from Operation Uganda. You all may remember that we had a mission team go to Uganda this past summer. And Russell and his wife Jen were the ones who received them and led them. And of course, are helping us to make that connection in Africa. And so Russell and Jen have been going around to various groups in the churches introducing and also just our covenant partners to what's going on in their ministry. And I just wanted to give him an opportunity to meet you all this morning and just give him a few minutes just sort of share with you what they're doing in Operation Uganda. And so because I said this to the group last night, because he also met with them last night, I said, around here we like to treat mission partners like rock stars, and so let's give them a hand as we welcome Russell Smith up here. All right.
Thanks, Bob. Can you hear me okay? Am I coming through? Great. Well, good morning. Lovely to be here. I'm from Australia. We normally say g'day, mate. That's how we greet each other. I don't know if you like the Australian accent. You'll get a little bit of it today. Although we've been in Uganda for 17 years now, I think accent's pretty much right over pretty strong. My wife and I and our 4 children went to Uganda 17 years ago. I'm not sure, does anyone here know the Mikla family? Bobby and Downey and all the kids here. Bobby and Downey came over just about 6 or 7 months after we arrived. And so our kids grew up together. They were there for about 7 years. So my daughter Grace and Redding are best friends. They grew up together, went through the mission school. And then my son Matthew and Emma are the same age as well, and have grown up together as well. So it's been wonderful. And hence that's our connection through the Mikla family with your great church. And we had a team last year come across. And if you're interested in coming across to Uganda, we do teams exceptionally well. I'm a little bit biased. But you get to see the Nile River, and you get to actually go on a boat on the Nile River as well. See some crocodiles, hippos, and we built in a safari as part of the mission trip. You come all the way to Africa, why not do a safari? And it's an amazing place. But let's just backdate a little bit back before 17 years, give you a bit of backstory. I'm not going to go for long this morning because I know Bob's got some great teaching to go with you guys with as well this morning. About 17 or so years ago, previously I was working in our local church. I was a youth pastor, and all youth pastors didn't get into a lot of trouble. We used to have frozen chickens and do 10-pin bowling with frozen chickens. We'd do a goldfish relay where we'd have live goldfish in our mouth, all the young people, and have to have it in their mouth, and have to run from one side of the church to the other, spit it in a bowl, someone would get it out. I love youth pastors. My son, now Matthew, who was the one that grew up in Uganda, he's working as a youth pastor in a church in Australia at the moment. So it's great to see that roll on. But we were working in a church as youth pastors and then associate pastors for quite a number of years in Australia. And it was a great season. And in August 2004, I was speaking in a youth group way up in North Queensland. And a friend of mine, the children's pastor of the church, gave me a call up in the evening. He said, "Russ, are you sitting down?" And I said, "No, Peter, I just finished preaching to a bunch of young people and praying for them." And he said, "Listen, mate," he said, your wife's on the way to the hospital, your kids are in the back of the ambulance, and your house is gone. It caught on fire, it's burnt down. That's not the phone call you want to get on a Saturday night." And we hightailed it back to Brisbane, Australia, where we lived in Queensland. And first thing I've done was hug our family, and thank goodness our family were all okay. And Jen just had a bit of smoke inhalation. But I gave them a hug. I remember, I was sitting down with our kids, and Matthew, our youngest at that time, I said, "Yeah, why did this happen? Why did this happen?" We read the verse out of Romans. where it says nothing can separate us, from the love of God, not death or life or death or angels or demons and angels. And it goes on. And although calamities and challenges come, nothing can separate us from the love of God. And during that time, certainly when you have something that can be a moving moment, a very challenging moment in life, I'm sure many of you could attest to it, because life is full of challenges, isn't it? And certainly having that foundation in Christ, when you go through shaky times, keeps us together. And as a family, we came together strong, and thank goodness we had insurance. And the house was rebuilt. It took 6 months, and we lived in an apartment during that time. The house was being rebuilt, but God was rebuilding something in us. And we were working in a local church, as I mentioned to you. And during that time, God was shifting our attention a little bit larger, taking the blinkers off a little bit, so to speak. And we thought, as a family, sometimes we can live our faith a little bit comfortable. And we were at the time. It was almost like we were sitting on the boat, when Jesus called Peter to step out of the water. I love that story in the Bible, and I've tried walking on water. It failed. I had a swimming pool at our house in Brisbane, and during Bible college, I was praying, listening to some good Christian music, and I took a step out in water, but I didn't succeed. But I love that with Peter, where he steps out in faith. And I know that sometimes without faith, we can sort of sit back on that boat and get comfortable, have our armchair and put the recliner up, and it's like, life's pretty good. And at that stage, life was comfortable as a Christian. It was like, and I said to my wife, Jen, I said, let's do something out of the box. Let's go away for a year with our family, because we came so close to, to losing one of our family members. We had no possessions because it was all burnt. So there was nothing holding us there. I thought, well, let's go somewhere that's an absolute need, somewhere that we can be the hands and feet of Christ. And as a family, let's just go somewhere and just minister. So we thought, well, let's go to Uganda, as anyone does. Let's go to a third world country. That's an absolute mess. I often wish now that we'd gone to Vanuatu or to Fiji or to the Maldives or Hawaii. It would have been wonderful. But we chose Uganda. And that's my first mission trip. I'm still stuck on it. 17 years later, I'm stuck. And so we're doing a missions trip through Ellen and Lindsay this September. I promise you, we'll bring them back, Bob. But we've had an adventure, and there's been certainly challenging. I mean, Uganda is a country that is gripped with extreme poverty, with the effects of HIV, one of the world's highest orphan rates in the world. And we went there as an Australian family with our 4 kids, and we pioneered the ministry operation in Uganda from grassroots. And God's good. I mean, you look over the years of, one step of faith after the other. And it's been a little bit like walking on water, to be honest, where it's like we don't know, what that next step is going to be. But 17 years later, we've seen God come through so many times. And today, we've got just over 1,000 orphan and vulnerable children that are in our program, that live within a family network, live with a grandmother or with an auntie or with their single mum. That we put through our sponsorship program. You've all got a booklet there, and I'll flip to a page. And if you do anything today, have a look at this little video here of Stephen. Just click the QR code, and it'll take you to a video. We knew Stephen as a young fella, total orphan boy, and living with his grandfather, and we were able to put him in our sponsorship program. And our sponsorship program, and on Sunday we'll be here, we're doing the Mission Minute on Sunday. We'll have a table in the foyer. We'll have a bunch of these sponsor cards here. So Stephen was one of these little cute kids. I've got Favor Maria here. She lives with her maternal grandmother. Her mother passed away, and she lives with her grandma. And so Stephen was a kid like this, and he's grown up through our sponsorship program. And today he's now graduated medical school as a surgeon. And to watch his story, it's a 3-minute video. It's a great bit of encouragement. So we've got just over 1,000 kids in our sponsorship program. We've got a local church that we planted in Kampala. It's booming. Be praying for us when you get together. We're believing to purchase the property next door to our property in Kampala to build a bigger church with a basketball-sized court inside and some seating up the back, so it can be a youth centre during the week and a church on the weekends. And we've seen God do a bunch of things through what we're doing in Uganda. We couldn't do it if it wasn't for people like you and churches like you, FPC, that would say, as part of your global missions, you want to partner with people on the field. And Jen and I count it such a privilege and an honour to be the hands and the feet on the ground in Uganda. And there's times when we know churches are praying and standing for us. There's times when we know there's been an angel go before us and clear a way, literally. And there's times when we say grace over our meals here in San Antonio. Let me tell you, it's a whole different grace sometimes when you're out in the village in Uganda and you're praying grace over a meal. You just see walking around. 10 minutes ago, that chicken was still walking. That's what happens. It's fresh. Not many refrigerators when you're out in the village. But God's good, and He's been good through it all. And I want to thank you as a church for partnering with us. If you guys want to know any more about the missions trip that's coming up in September, there's a lunch that's going to be on after church on Sunday. If you want to chat to Jen and I, we'll be here on Sunday as well, so feel free, grab us. We're more than happy to have a chat. And we'll be around that table that'll be in the foyer as well. But I just wanted to pop in. Thank you, Bob, for giving me some time so you can put a face to the name of where your mission support is going. God bless you guys.
Thank you so much.
Let's all bow in prayer. Lord, again, just as we did last night, and as we did this morning, and as we continue to do, we just continue to pray for Russell and Jen. But Lord, as I also see these cards he's holding up, Lord, there are 1,000 kids in Uganda that these guys have identified that need relationships, that need your help. There's so many more. Lord, we just ask that you would help us as a church to continue to know how to best serve, these children, how to best serve your kingdom, and how to best support Russell and Jen and all that they're doing. Lord, help us to just be inspired. And Lord, we just ask you to just give us new eyes to see what you're doing. Pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, my friend. Yeah, good to see you. Yeah, all right. Call me Nate. I'm almost an Australian honorary citizen. That's awesome. Well, these guys are not only, they've been here in San Antonio all week, so they're not just honorary Texans, they're like almost naturalized Texans. So we're glad that they're here. Hey, before we get into our lesson today, let me say a word about the fact that next week is actually our last week of PBS. We'll be concluding this series, but as we come to the end of PBS, we're also coming to Holy Week, which is just one of the best times of the year. And as I was thinking about our preparations for next week, because we'll be talking about that week of Jesus's Passion. I thought, how might we approach our questions and our study group time for next week? And so if you look at the questions for next week, you'll see that a lot of it is focused on events taking place here at the church. The first question is, what are the 4 services FEC celebrates during Holy Week? And then the next question, what event of Holy Week does each service commemorate? I'm going to go ahead and just confess, this is a commercial. We want you to come. We want you to participate, because there is no way in the time that we have on Thursday morning next week we can cover everything that happened in that story of that one week. I mean, arguably, 2/3 of the Gospels takes place in that last week of Jesus's Passion. And so, one of the things that I've done is I've gone through and using some exercises that we're using here at the church, I'm really going to challenge you, not simply to just read some passages, but to participate in our services, but also in this exercise that we've been using, the Stations of the Cross. A lot of times, and you'll see this when you read the booklet, which is over here, but the Stations of the Cross is very much is an ecumenical exercise. A lot of people think of it simply as an exercise of Roman Catholicism, but it is something that's been practiced by the Reformed Church in various generations in various ways. And so what we would like to ask you to do is, as you're going through these questions, use this tool, use this resource to answer some of these questions, and to just kind of, even if you don't come down here physically and go around to the different stations, just to kind of, in your mind, use that as a review of what happened during Holy Week, and particularly on Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and then of course on Easter. So the questions are going to be a little bit different. They're sort of more lab related than necessarily lecture related next week. But I hope that you will take an opportunity to use that resource and to really engage in the services and in those exercises in preparation for you. What's that?
You forgot the egg.
No, I didn't.
That's the
I didn't forget the egg hunt. It is that is, but you're welcome to show up. You're welcome to show up for the egg hunt. We do Christianize it quite a bit. It's so thank y'all for doing that. I'm glad that Russell was able to come and talk to us today because as we're thinking about our topic for today, I think it's really interesting to think about how God used a house fire to reshuffle his life. God used that event. Sometimes God does that. God uses a calamity. God uses a tragedy to kind of reshuffle our decks to think about how we might be putting too much priority on some things and not focusing on the real things that God wants us to focus on. And we're gonna talk about a little bit about that because today we're gonna be talking about a house fire of sorts and how Jesus says this is going to reshuffle your deck. But I want to talk about this in the context of I think what would probably be considered Jesus' second most famous sermon. How many of you have ever? Well, let me ask this: what is Jesus' first most famous sermon? His most famous sermon, Sermon on the Mount. Yeah, we would say I'll also include under that same topic really the Sermon on the Plain, which we hear about in Luke. What was his second most famous sermon? Do you think? Yeah, we don't really think about his second most famous sermon. His second most famous sermon is a sermon that he gave on the Mount of Olives called the Olivet Discourse, or the Mount of Olives sermon. And it is a very, very important sermon. We're going to talk about that in some depth today. But we're going to also, just to kind of set the stage, I want to talk about one of the most important speeches that I've ever heard. You all may remember back in the late 80s, I believe it was in 1986, when President Reagan gave a speech at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. And what was he standing, in addition to standing in front of the Brandenburg Gate, what other building feature was he standing in front of? The Berlin Wall, exactly. He was standing there in front of the Berlin Wall and completely against his speechwriter's advice and going against even the manuscript that they had given him. President Reagan uttered one of those lines that will echo throughout history. He said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." Did you know that he originally, in the original speech, he put that in. His speechwriters took it out because the staff said it was too provocative. He put it back in, they took it out again, and then he just said it. God bless the giver. I mean, what a wonderful person. But he knew that this was the moment. Now, here's the thing. That speech really did change my life. I mean, I am a child of the 80s. I graduated from high school in 1987. My whole life was defined by the Cold War. My psyche was defined by the Cold War. But, from that point on, my entire worldview was going to be challenged and changed. I had thought that, through my senior year in high school that for the rest of my life, the world would be divided into, the Soviet Union and the United States, or communism and democracy. But really, it was after that speech that a lot began to change. And there's certain speeches throughout history where things really do change. But I want you to think about that speech. That speech, I think, mattered for a couple of reasons. Number one was the content. I mean, what he said had to be said. But the other was because of the context. The content and the context. The context, him saying that right in front of the Berlin Wall, right in front of the Brandenburg Gate, meant one thing, that we are here. And this is not some abstract thing. I'm not talking hypothetically about a philosophical division between East and West. I am talking about a concrete and barbed wire system dividing members of their families from one another. Dividing a nation, literally. And when we talk about a nation divided, like in the Civil War, or even right now, or something like that, there was literally a wall. dividing these two countries. And it was not a wall to keep people out, it was a wall to keep people in. And so Reagan gets up, and at the Brandenburg Gate, he says, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. But of course, the context matters because, what if he had given that speech from the Oval Office or the Rose Garden? What if he was doing it like I am and just said, this is the Berlin Wall on a PowerPoint or slideshow, I guess at that point it would have been. It wouldn't have had the same power. I mean, he was there, he had skin in the game, and they could actually see it. The content matters. The content of a speech, of course, matters, but the context matters as well. And that's why today we're going to talk about Jesus' second most important sermon. Maybe, I don't know, I shouldn't say important, I should say famous. I mean, both of it, every word that came out of Jesus' mouth was important. But his second most famous sermon was the Olivet Discourse. And we're going to talk about that because, not just because of what he said, but because of where he said it. Let's talk about the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives is a high spot, a mountain directly across an area called the Kidron Valley from Jerusalem. And as you look across, you're up here. This is actually a picture I took from a lookout point on one side, looking over into Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. And it's just a beautiful spot. You see, kind of as an orientation point, you see over here, kind of level with us, is the Dome of the Rock, which is the huge Muslim monument that's over on the old Temple Mount. You see the foundations of the Temple Mount all along here. And then here's a little bit more of a close-up. This is at the other end, going down in the steps leading up to the temple. Just if you were to go over to the left a little bit more there, you'd be in the city of David. But of course, as you are standing on the Mount of Olives now, the thing that really dominates your vision, you can see I'm right in your way, aren't I? The thing that dominates your vision is really the Dome of the Rock. And we've talked a little bit about that, and it really is a beautiful structure, but we remember that it sits on the spot where the original temple sat. And while it is huge, it is only about half the size of the temple that was destroyed by the Romans. So just kind of going back for a second, this is what you see standing where we were when we were there looking at it, looking out from the Mount of Olives over to Jerusalem. But when Jesus gave his Olivet Discourse, this is what he and his disciples and his other hearers were seeing. They were looking right at this massive edifice on the other side of the Kidron Valley that dominated the landscape and everything else around it. Now, so just get in your mind, it's a different view. Jesus is, everything he says in the Olivet Discourse, and I know we haven't talked about it yet, but everything he says, he's saying with the temple in the background. Now people have given me way too much credit. I ended up preaching about 4 times a day on the Israel trip. And people said, gosh, especially the pastor, how did you prepare for that? Gosh, that was a lot of work. I was like, not really. Because when you're there and you're just overwhelmed with inspiration, and then you've got the world's greatest backdrop and props behind you, I mean, the sermon kind of preaches itself. I mean, and you all know me, I don't have a problem talking, so I just plug me in and wind me up and go. But when you've got this backdrop, imagine Jesus, and there's the temple, there's Jerusalem, there's the Kidron Valley. And what's so special about that? What's so special about the Kidron Valley? I mean, this huge, big deal. I mean, there's a creek there, and there's a slope on one side and a slope on the other side. Well, what's interesting now about the Kidron Valley is that it's covered on both sides with graves. Now, these are Jewish grave sites. And there are literally thousands of them. Most of them were purchased by very wealthy Jewish families throughout history. Some of modern Israel's most notable dignitaries are buried on these slopes of the Mount of Olives, and they go all the way down into the valley. I believe that Oskar Schindler is one of the few Gentiles who was ever buried on that slope, from Schindler's List. You'll also notice, like on the graves, you see those rocks. That's kind of a way to commemorate, like we put flowers on graves here in the West, in that culture, putting a rock on the tomb or a rock on the grave is a way to, it's like putting flowers on the grave to say, we still appreciate you, we still remember you, all that sort of thing. So if you can imagine that on the Mount of Olives, you've got this entire slope just covered in raised graves. Now, that's the Mount of Olives slope. But of course, a valley has two sides, right? What's on the other side of the slope? Well, just below Jerusalem, it's also covered with graves. But what's special about those graves? The graves on the Jerusalem side are Muslim. It's a huge Muslim cemetery that goes all the way from the walls of Jerusalem all the way down into the valley again. Here's a picture of this is one of the temple gates that's right there. You see the thousands of graves in front of it. If you look at this next picture, right here, you can see it. There's a funeral going on right here, a Muslim funeral going on. This is pretty close to dusk, but right there at the foot of the wall, next to Jerusalem. And so on one side of the valley, on the Mount of Olives side, it is covered with Jewish graves. On the other side of the valley, it's covered with Muslim graves. Why is that? Well, remember that even though they are sadly in such deep conflict nowadays, remember that the Muslims originally felt that they were the inheritors of Judaism and Christianity, and through Muhammad, through the final refinement of God's revelation. But the reason that you have Muslim graves on one side of the Kidron Valley and Jewish graves on the other side is because both the Jews and the Muslims in ancient times believed that the Kidron Valley was going to be the place of the final judgment. This is where it was going to happen. When we stand before the judgment seat of God, it will take place in this valley, in the Kidron Valley. And so, as Jesus is standing up to talk about, or to give his Olivet discourse, he's doing so with the temple in the background. And I don't know if the graves were as prominent then, or maybe they were, maybe they weren't. They were probably already using it to some degree, but this was a place where they believed that the last judgment was going to take place on the great day of the Lord. And he's giving this speech about, with that temple background and with this valley of judgment in the background. And of course, what is the topic of his speech? What is the topic of the Olivet Discourse? The topic of the Olivet Discourse, the theme of the Olivet Discourse is God's judgment. It is about the recreation of the world. It's about what we would call in theological terms eschatology. What does eschatology mean? Eschatology means the study of the last things. So a couple of years ago, a lot of you all were with me when we did our year-long series on Revelation. The study of Revelation is a study of eschatology, the last things. And the Olivet Discourse, given the week that Jesus was crucified, across from the temple, next to the valley where the last judgment was supposed to take place, was a speech loaded with meaning. In other words, Jesus didn't give a speech about his return. He didn't give a speech about the final judgment. He didn't give a speech about the final battle up in Galilee next to the seashore. He gave it in the spot where it was all supposed to take place. Kind of like Ronald Reagan's speech at the Brandenburg Gate and the Berlin Wall. Here he was in that context that was meant to be a part of the speech itself. So, of course, as a huge Bible nerd, when I got there and I started putting these things together, it's like, wait a minute. You mean to tell me that Jesus was looking out, or that his hearers were looking out at the temple and this valley when he's talking about not the end of the world, but the recreation of the world, the second coming and the last things. So that's what we're really focused on today. We're talking about the Olivet Discourse, but not only about what he said, but thinking in terms of where he said it. So let's talk about that for a moment. The Olivet Discourse. This passage is filled with eschatological power. That is to say, eternal power. And there are parts of it which are super, super familiar to people. Maybe they're familiar because they are thinking in terms of like Revelation, or maybe they're just some parables that are super well known as well. But we have to, again, think about the literary context as well as the geographical context. But as we begin to talk about this passage, let's think about some big themes here. The big theme of this passage is that we, as followers of Jesus Christ, need to be prepared. Why? Because we don't know when God is going to bring his kingdom to earth. And finally, again, be ready. We have to be prepared. We don't know when it's going to happen. And finally, get ready and be ready. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So Jesus is giving the Sermon on the Mount of Olives, the Olivet Discourse. And again, there he is. And over here is the temple, right here. And how does he begin the sermon? He begins with this. Jesus left the temple and was going away, when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. But he answered them, "You see all of those? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." How many of you all ever traveled to New York before 9/11? One of the things we all wanted to see was what? The Twin Towers. I still have trouble seeing new pictures of New York without the Twin Towers. Morgan and I were watching a movie not too long ago, and she said, "Oh, wow, look at that. It's the Twin Towers." It was a little bit older movie. She said, "Look, you can still see the Twin Towers." And I thought, oh, yeah, that's right. They're gone. That's no longer the New York skyline. To the Jew, to the people of Israel, the idea that the temple was going to be gone was unfathomable. The idea that anybody, either would or could destroy the temple again. Of course, the Babylonians had done it once, so that should have been a clue that it could be destroyed. But the idea that it would ever be destroyed again was unthinkable to them. And yet, Jesus is standing here on the mountain, as he has said in other ways, saying, this temple that you treasure so much, because remember, what were the disciples doing? They say, look at the temple. Man, aren't we something else? Again, Messiah, you're the Messiah. When you come fully into your power, look at what's waiting for you. And Jesus is saying, you know what? None of this is going to be here. This is all going to be wiped out. This is going to be burned up. It's kind of like what Russell was saying. When God burns something down, it kind of reshuffles your deck. Have you ever thought that maybe not just that the temple was destroyed, but in some ways it kind of had to be destroyed to reshuffle the deck? I'm going to say something super duper controversial here at First Presbyterian Church. Would this church still exist if this building burned down? Yeah, by definition, it better, because the church is not the people. It's not the building, it's the people. But for the people of Jesus' time, the idea that Judaism could really survive without the temple? Oh, come on. But Jesus begins this sermon with, that thing that you treasure so much is going to burn down. It's like me standing up in the pulpit downstairs and saying, I know you all love it here, but this is all going to go away. And all of us will say, well, sure, but not in my lifetime. What if it did? In the town where I used to live, North Augusta, South Carolina, Grace United Methodist Church, and one electrical spark turned the spark to fire that burned down the entire thing. Church got stronger, interestingly enough. Great church. But they had to, but it was all gone, and it was because the church didn't burn down. The church was the group of people crying and holding one another up when the building burned down. So Jesus is, in a sense, reshuffling the deck, saying, are you ready for God to work even through calamity? Because Jesus made this prophecy that this temple was going to be going away. Now, I'm sure that at this point they were thinking, oh, well, he means metaphorically again. Because he talked about the temple being torn down and being raised up in 3 days. And when we talk about it, well, when Jesus says that, he's talking about his resurrection. No, Jesus this time is talking about literally. This temple's going away. What happened to the temple? In 70 AD, the Romans burned it to the ground. How do you burn a stone temple to the ground? Really, really hot heat. They actually burned it to the ground. They rolled off what was left into the valley beside it on both sides, and the Temple Mount was leveled. They wanted the destruction to be complete. They wanted defiance against Rome to be punished in such a public and visible way that nobody would ever rise up again. Certainly nobody in that part of the world. And when they did, when the Romans burned down the temple in 70 AD, they thought that would break the back of the Jewish people, and they didn't really even have the Christians on the radar yet. But they thought that would break the back of these people who thought they were God's people. As a matter of fact, they thought, if we can burn down your temple and your God can't stop us, then what good is your God? Our gods are obviously stronger. Now, Jesus begins in this sermon with that pronouncement, a series of things that he says are going to happen, a series of calamities that are going to absolutely reshuffle the deck. First is the destruction of the temple, the bringing down of the Twin Towers, that thing that you never could imagine would have ever happened. Okay, number two, looking at verse 3 in chapter 24, you're going to see a lot of things happening that will all be summarized under one word. For those of you who love Revelation study and other things, the word is tribulation. Tribulation is the biblical and theological word for all hell breaks loose on earth. Tribulation means suffering. Tribulation means calamity. Tribulation means catastrophe. Just looking at what he talks about. Jesus answered them and said, "See that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, I'm the Christ." But you're going to have wars and rumors of wars. Following the destruction of the temple, Israel is going to be at constant war. God's people are always going to be under the threat of violence. There will be wars and rumors of wars. There are going to be false prophets. There's going to be famine and earthquake. You're going to see natural disasters. Of course, there were natural disasters before the fall of the temple, but that's going to continue. But it's not just the world's going to suffer famine and disaster. You're going to suffer famine and disaster. By this point, the disciples and everybody else following Jesus were thinking, okay, any day now, we're all going to be ushered into his great train of victory. And we aren't going to have to worry about food or health or anything like that because we're with him. But he's saying, no, the temple's going down first, and then all those things that make life painful and catastrophic, they're going to continue. And then people are going to come along with false answers. Many false prophets will arise. They're going to come along and say, well, I've got the answer. I mean, do we have any of that now? I mean, do we have any false prophets in our world right now trying to tell us they have the answer to all of our problems? Absolutely. Yeah, way too many. Yeah, exactly. And then he also says that lawlessness will be increased. I hate to say, I promise you, I am not one of those, sandwich board wearing and the end is here type of guys. But it's like, whenever we see lawlessness increasing, so on one hand, you've got violence between nations, wars and rumors of wars, but you've also got lawlessness and violence, person to person, crime, that sort of thing. I mean, all these things are just manifestations of the fallen world. The temple comes down and it just takes the mask off the fact that this world is broken and sinful and collapsing, and left to our own devices, we would absolutely burn ourselves up and out. We will destroy ourselves if left on our own. And so Jesus is saying this is what's going to happen first. The temple's going to be destroyed. And then the tribulation, it's going to be hard. And we don't know if that means like for 7 days, 7 months, 7 years, 7 centuries, 7 epochs. But from the time of the destruction of the temple until Christ returns, it's not going to be bad. I mean, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be bad. And we need to be prepared for that. So the first part of the sermon, he is setting up the context. He's saying, I want you to be ready. Second half of the sermon is about how we get ready, but the first half of the sermon is you need to be ready. You need to plant your feet. You need to get in your wide stance. You need to be ready because you're going to get hit. If you are a follower of Jesus Christ, you will get hit. Now, I know that I say that, and I know it shocks people, but there's a great old preacher story about a time when this tent evangelist came to town. Wonderful guy, popular speaker, kind of an old tent revival guy. And man, he drew thousands of people to his revivals. And everything he preached, it was very much, it's like, if you will just give your life to Christ, he will bless you. He will give you the things you ask for. He will heal you. He will give you the things you deserve. He'll take care of your pain. He'll, the people you love won't suffer. He'll heal your sickness. All this kind of stuff. And he says, oh, and on top of that, heaven is awesome. It is beautiful. That's where you'll go. You'll be in eternity, and you'll never have another worry again. And finally, this old, I'm going to go ahead and say it, this old Presbyterian pastor in the back of revival, after he'd done this altar call, after all these people come up and given their lives to Christ and given their lives to this vision, this old country minister who'd been there forever walked up to the evangelist and said, brother, that was an absolutely beautiful sermon. He said, but when are you going to tell them about the lions? When are you going to tell them about the lions? When are you going to preach from the book of Hebrews? And see that those who are most blessed in God's calculus are often the ones who suffer the most. Jesus is saying, get ready. He said in another very famous speech or teaching that he gave, he said, be ready. In this world you will have trouble. Same word. In this world you will have tribulation. But take heart. I have overcome. Take heart. I have overcome the world. In this world you'll have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome it. He's saying, get ready. But for how long? How long do we have to endure this? Well, if the destruction of the temple is the beginning, then the desecration of the Temple Mount is the end. What does he mean? What do I mean by that? If you look in verse 15 of 24. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Okay, so that phrase, let the reader understand, yeah, good luck with that, okay? Because scholars have been debating about everything that this passage means for literally 2,000 years. Let me take a stab at it. Let the reader understand. First of all, on that comment, I think a lot of the stuff, sometimes the stuff that we read in the Bible is difficult to understand just because we are hardwired to think differently from people in the ancient world. The way they lay down an argument, the way they make the case is just different from the way we do it. So it's like sometimes we look at steps the way we would lay them out, and they look at steps a different way. And so part of it's just that. Part of it is the common lexicon, which they all had. They knew exactly what the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel was. Do you have an idea what that is? I always have to look it up again. What is that? The abomination of desolation is actually a historical reference back to something that happened between the Old and the New Testaments. You remember as we talked about the Maccabees and how they were fighting their Greek overlords? Alexander the Great conquered all of the Middle East and Asia. And after he died, his kingdom was divided up, and one of those empires, one of those Greek generals, ruled over Judea, and his descendants tried to Hellenize or Greekify all of Judea, tried to Greekify the Jews. And one of the things that they did was that they placed in the temple a statue, an idol to Zeus. And what else did they do? In addition to placing that idol in the temple, what else did they do? They had pigs sacrificed on the altar, desecrating the holy place of God. This is a historical reference to that. So what this is saying is Jesus is saying, when something like that, when that type of thing happens again, you will see that then that is a sign that things are moving forward, that things are maybe coming to a conclusion. Now, there's a lot of interesting history here. You know, the Dome of the Rock sits on the Temple Mount right now. But the Dome of the Rock didn't come along for about 600 years. Okay? What happened between the destruction of the temple and the Dome of the Rock? What was sitting on the Temple Mount? Anybody know? It was a shrine to Jupiter, who was the Roman version of Zeus. So there was actually a pagan temple on the Temple Mount for many, many years until Constantine the Great had it removed. Constantine the Great was the first Christian Roman emperor. And so, so you had a pagan shrine there. But this, I believe, is talking about something much larger. This is talking about a time when, I think this is not even talking about the Dome of the Rock necessarily. I think that what he is pointing to here is some time when something so vile to God is built and put upon the Temple Mount that it actually becomes a desecration to the holiness of God. And he says this is, so you think about it kind of bookends. You've got the destruction of the temple, and then you've got this final blasphemy. Whatever it is, something so offensive to God that it absolutely triggers everything else, sets it in motion. And so you have this point in the story, and then, according to Jesus, what happens? And then after this time of apostasy, after the people have completely turned against God, and please remember, this is not necessarily a foreign power that will do this. This will be God's people, possibly, ostensibly, who put this abomination of desolation in the place of God. And we were reading about this today in the book of Isaiah, when it really talks about how the Babylonians had really just, in their own minds, had usurped the place of God. Your God's nothing. We're more powerful than your God. And don't we do that all the time? We knock God off the throne and put ourselves there. So, whatever it is, there will be something that is so vile to God that it triggers this next series of events. And the next event to come is the second coming of Christ. This is where Jesus himself talks about his second coming. The second coming is not something simply declared in Revelation. Jesus himself said, I am coming again. The Son of Man is coming again. If you look at verse 29, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And again, I love this picture. Where is that supposed to take place? What is it? If this is the Western Wall, if you've been to Israel, this is the Western Wall. It's facing up to what? The Mount of Olives. Yeah, so Kidron Valley's in between. Here comes Jesus from where? The Mount of Olives direction. Again, context. Look over my shoulder. You see the temple. It's not going to be there. Look over your shoulder. It's the direction the Son of Man will come from the west. Why do cathedral doors face west? That's the way that the Lord's supposed to come back from. Just a thought. Anyway, the coming of the Son of Man. Again, here he is in this environment. And that, of course, goes into a series of events. Now, to get all the details, you want to read the book of Revelation. Jesus is really giving kind of a 30,000-foot summary of what's happening. But he says several things will happen. After his second coming, one of the things that will happen is the decisive battle between God and all that which opposes him. So in other words, between good and evil, between God and evil. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. And here's what how Revelation describes this. The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up, and to prepare the way of the kings from the east. So Christ is coming from the west. The kings opposing him are coming from the east, from where Babylon and all that was. And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet 3 unclean spirits like frogs, for they are demonic spirits, performing signs, who go abroad to the kings of the whole world to assemble them for battle on the great day of God the Almighty. Behold, I am coming like a thief. Here, Revelation starts to lift phrases from the Sermon on the Mount. Behold, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is one who stays awake, keeping his garments on, that he may not go about naked and be seen exposed. Remember that phrase, because we're about to cover that in the Sermon on the Mount of Olives. And they assembled them at the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. Now, what is Armageddon? Armageddon is one of those words that has been used and misused and thrown around in Hollywood and in books and in plays and all this kind of stuff. But Armageddon is a real place. Armageddon is a real place. This final battle between good and evil is, according to Scripture, scheduled to take place, booked to take place, in a place called Megiddo. Now, Armageddon, what does it mean? Har Megiddo is actually a compound, which means the hill of Megiddo. And Har means hill. So the hill of Megiddo is an actual place. But what's interesting about the hill of Megiddo is that it's in the Jezreel Valley. Again, remember the place we talked about in the compact nature of Galilee, in that area where you've got Mount Carmel, Mount Tabor, Nazareth, all these things right there, and that's sort of around this valley. Well, Megiddo is part of that valley. Har Megiddo, or Armageddon, is actually a piece of that, is actually a settlement in that area. And what it actually means is the hill of Megiddo, but really, it's not really an actual hill. The hill of Megiddo is actually a tell. You know what a tell is? A tell is, I want to say it's not really a man-made hill, because nobody sets out to make a tell. But what it is it's a place where, so you and I settle and we build a village. And then 1,000 years later, after our village has been deserted and burned down and all this kind of stuff, another group comes in and builds on top of us. Then it happens again. Another group builds on top of them until you've actually got this hill. Israel is covered in these tells. The Middle East is covered in these tells. Why? Because this is a great place to build a village. There's water here. There's protection here. There's good pile of land here. So they keep building in the same spots. And eventually, after thousands of years, you get these tells, these hills. And what's fascinating about Armageddon, or the hill of Megiddo, is that archaeologically speaking, it is a treasure trove. It's like sending down a core sample of 5,000 years worth of civilizations. But that's not the only reason it's important to understand. This was also a spot where different armies over the generations would come to fight. Because it's a crossroads. Remember, we talked about Galilee being a crossroads. This is another one of those crossroads where armies marching from the east and north, or from the west and south, would come. And this is the place where they would often kind of meet. One of the most important decisive battles was fought between the Syrians and the Egyptians, the Pharaoh Necho, about, maybe 600 years before the birth of Christ. But it was one of those pivotal battles that really kind of broke the back of Egypt's long-term and aspiring power. Remember, Egypt never really died out as an empire for long. They were always trying to get back in the game. And it was there that they met the Assyrians. I can't remember if it was the Assyrians or the Syrians, but it was one of those consequential battles, like the Battle of the Bulge, or like Gettysburg, or something. One of those battles that really made a difference historically, Stalingrad, something like that. But this was one of those places where army after army, battle after battle came to take place and strive with one another. And so you have this place that over and over again is a place for battles. And so if you're going to have the battle of all battles, the battle between God and everything that opposes God, this is the place to have it. And so Jesus is saying, okay, not only, so the temple's going to be destroyed, it's going to be desecrated, there's going to be tribulation, it's going to be desecrated, and then the Son of Man will return. By this point, everybody knows that when he says the Son of Man, he's talking about him. I will return. The decisive battle will take place. And then we'll come to the judgment in just a second. But throughout this, and he pivots now into the second part of the sermon. And I'm sorry, we're going a little bit longer, but We always do, come on. I don't even know why I apologize for that anymore. It's just, it's really insincere now, isn't it? Gosh, I'm terrible. But he pivots into this next part of the sermon. I'm really going to hit this at a very high level in terms of theme. Once he talks about Armageddon, he talks about, now we're moving towards the judgment. And after saying, these are the things that are going to happen. These are the things that are going to happen. These are the eternal consequences of my coming. The next thing he says, be ready. And from this point, he lists out 5 different parables, all describing how we need to be ready. The first is, he talks about a fig tree. And the parable of the fig tree is all about, it's like, listen, there are going to be signs. They're not going to be signs that will allow you to predict when this is going to happen. Because in verse 34, in this passage, he says, remember, we don't, truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all things take place. But he also says, no one, not even the angels in heaven, know when this is going to happen. So he says, but there will be signs. When you see these signs, like the first one, they saw the destruction of the temple. When you see the desecration of the Temple Mount, when you see, when these wars and rumors of war, all these sorts of things, it's like, know it's going to happen. So here's a kind of an interesting thought though. Isn't tribulation always taking place? So it could be any time. Now Jesus says that there will be signs, and you will know it, and it will be distinct. But be ready all the time. Because he says, first of all, be ready, but you're not going to know, like the fig tree, you're going to start to see buds, you're going to start to see leaves, you're going to start to see things, and it's about to bloom. So be ready. Be ready. The next parable, though, after he says to be watchful, concerning that day and the hour no one knows, the next thing he tells is a parable of 2 servants. And this begins a series of 3 parables that says, okay, this is what you need to, this is what you need to be, this is how you need to prepare. First of all, you need to be good. When Christ comes, you need to be ready you need to be good. What is this parable about these 2 servants about? It's about one servant who is faithful to his master when his master is gone. The other is a real jerk. He beats up his other servants, he gets drunk all the time, he wastes his master's stuff. He's immoral. Jesus says, you don't want to be that guy when I come back. You want to be good. You want to be righteous. You want to be faithful when I come back. You don't want to be like the wicked servant. You want to be like the wise servant who's ready. The wicked servant's like, oh, I'll be ready. When he comes back, I'll clean up my act. No. You need to be righteous all the time. The second parable, the parable of the 10 virgins. What is this parable about? It's about being prepared. It's about not being slack. It's about thinking, oh, well, I know how this is going to work and I've got time to catch up. What's the parable of the 10 virgins? You've got these virgins who are waiting for the bridegroom to return from the wedding. And half of them run out of oil and they're like, oh, well, we'll just go get some more. And they, so they go and they get some more, and then the bridegroom comes back and they weren't ready because they weren't there. In other words, keep your lamp filled up. Keep your lamp ready. Be ready because it can happen at any time. Don't be like the wicked servant. Don't be like the 10 virgins, 5 of whom get left out. But then there's also this third parable, the parable of the talents, which you often hear in terms of like stewardship and stuff like that, but it really is an eschatological and eternal issue that he's talking about. He says, in a sense, and I don't know how I said, be good, be prepared. The other one was like, be busy. In other words, don't waste what God's given us in this time. What's interesting about this parable is he says, while you're waiting for the Lord to come back, remember that the Lord has given you gifts. The Lord has equipped you. The Lord has blessed you with things that you are supposed to steward in his absence. So he gives to one, he gave one servant 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. So in other words, he gave each one of these servants some money. He said, I want you to use it while I'm gone. And the one who had 5, went out and he doubled it. The one who had 2 went out and doubled it. The one who had 1, though, was scared because he said, man, my master can be tough. So I'm just going to hide this and make sure. I don't want to lose anything, but I'm not going to gain anything either. That'll be okay. He won't take a loss on me, but he isn't going to gain anything either. And why does he say that? He says, because I know my master's harsh. I know my master's tough. Now it doesn't say anything in the parable of the master being tough or harsh. But what we understand here is that he decided he wasn't going to use what God had given him, for the sake of just, not wanting to work or just not wanting to fail. And God says, you know what? I'm not judging you on your success or failure. I'm judging you on your faithfulness. You go out and you try your best and you blow that one talent on an opportunity that didn't pan out. That's not nearly as bad as saying, you know what, I didn't even try to do anything for your kingdom. Again, it's like, I don't know, I don't think I'm a 5-talent guy. Maybe I'm a 2-talent guy. I hope I'm not a 1-talent guy. But, it's like the 5-talent guy, that's like the guy who had all the opportunities, all the education, is a genius, good looking, tall, all that kind of stuff, and I'm not. And, he's got all the gifts, and then he leverages those in a powerful way. The 2-talent guy is the good shoe leather person, knows, maybe they don't have all the same opportunities, but man, what they have, they make a lot out of it. The 1-talent guy, unfortunately, maybe he didn't have much, but God said, I trust you with what you got. And I'm going to do something with it. Unfortunately, he didn't trust himself. And he was too scared. He didn't believe that God believed in him. When your coach puts you on the field, when your coach puts you on the court, he believes that you can play the game. He believes that you're gonna add to the team. The problem is, we get out there and we think, I can't do it. I can't do it. God's saying, I think you can. That's why I gave you this. So go do it. So what God is saying to us, what Jesus is saying to us is I want you to be good. I want you to be wise. I want you to don't let your fuel run out. And I want you to be busy. I want you to put in the effort. I want you to sow that seed. The sower went out to sow his seed. Spread the seed. Let out the net. Go do it. Don't sit idle. You know what John Calvin's last words were on his deathbed? He was still writing. On his deathbed, he was still writing or still dictating at that point. Somebody said, Pastor, John said, brother, you've got to take a break. You've got to rest. He says, I would not die. I would not have my Lord come and have him find me idle. He didn't want Jesus to call him home and find him at all lazy. So again, here, Jesus is saying, God's given us gifts to be using during this time. Don't hunker down. Don't bunker up. Don't hide in your holy huddles, waiting for God to return, just trying to consolidate what you have, hoping that he won't lose anything. That's I guess in many ways this last parable is about not playing to lose. Or playing not to lose. And too many Christians play not to lose. My salvation secure, that's all that matters. My one talent secure, that's all that matters. Your salvation doesn't matter. Your relationship with God, your health, your poverty, it doesn't matter. I'm safe. Jesus is saying, don't play not to lose, play to win. And then finally, you have this last parable. And this is really about how to prepare. And this is where we talk about the final judgment, which is really the climax of the Sermon on the Mount of Olives, or the Olivet Discourse. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. And before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right, but the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. And then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when do we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer him, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these of my brothers, you did it to me. Now we've heard these words 1,000 times. But have you ever considered that these happen in the context of Jesus' preaching about the last judgment? Because what's the consequence? Like, so you got those who are on his right, the sheep, who are being blessed into the kingdom because what? Because they did these things. And then on the other side, you do have, from the mouth of Jesus, the most loving person who ever lived, a pronouncement and the reality of condemnation. There are those on his right and there are those on his left. This is in the context of final judgment. So this is important. But what is the heart of what he says in this parable of the judgment? The heart of this is love. Because what does he say separates the sheep from the goats? Is it piety, extreme piety? Is it extreme religiousness? Is it taking care of you and your own? Is it, singing the right songs, saying the right words, having the right affiliations? No. Making the right sacrifices? No. What is it that distinguishes those on the left from those on the right? It's love. It's kindness. It says, in the end, what matters, in the end, the way we get ready for the judgment is by loving people. Now, let's break down that loving people statement for a second. Jesus, when asked, what is the greatest commandment, said what? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And then he added a third commandment to that. He also said in the night he was betrayed, and you shall love one another as I have loved you. So in all three of them, love God. This is our motto. Love God, love one another, love the same. Okay? Jesus' command, the summary of the whole law, the sum of all the law and the prophets, is to love. Now, we think, well, yes, of course, loving our neighbors, but he also said love God. What does he say about loving God in this passage? How do we love God? If you've done it to the least of these, you've done it to me. If you have loved the least of these, you have loved me. If you have not loved the least of these, you've not loved me. When we do not love our brothers and sisters and our neighbors, we're not loving God. When we do love our brothers and sisters and neighbors, what are we doing? We're loving God because we're loving the image of God in them. Now, that's not to say worship and doctrine and things like that don't matter. But what he is really pushing us here to understand is that in the end, in the context of eternity, and the context of the final judgment, and the context of our being in front of the great white throne, the most important thing that we can do to prepare is to love. He doesn't say, pray these prayers, make these sacrifices, because what does he already say? I desire what more than sacrifice? Mercy. It's not these check marks, it's not these programs, it's not these accomplishments, it's not these buildings, it's not these achievements, it's not these trophies. Have you loved your neighbor? Have you loved me well by loving them? That's what's key. I just think it is fascinating that Jesus is talking about enormous, cosmic, universal things. Life, death, eternity, heaven, hell, the second coming, Armageddon, everything. And he brings it down to what? Did you feed the hungry? Did you clothe the naked? Did you visit those people who were in prison? Did you bring hope and joy and good news to those who were broken and lost? All that other stuff, it's all to bring about a world where that is the key, where that is the priority. And so Jesus is taking this enormous moment to talk about the fulfillment of history, to say, you know what the most important thing is? It's love. And unfortunately, we've made that so trite. We've made it so almost like a lyric in a bad love song or something like that. But it really is, Jesus is saying, When we love him by loving one another, when we love him by loving our neighbors, when we love our neighbors and we love when we love God and that flows to them, then that's finally everything that matters. We love God by loving his people. So how do we prepare for the coming of the Lord? Kindness. You want to know how to be prepared? Look at Matthew 25. Clothe the naked, feed the hungry, visit those in prison. You want to know how to be wise? Same answer. You want to know how to be? You want to know how to use the gifts that God's given you? Same answer. You want to know how to be prepared for the judgment seat of Christ? Same answer. When the Son of Man comes on a cloud, and he separates the sheep from his right, sheep on his right from the goats on his left, and that has nothing to do with the way you all are divided in this room right now. When he comes, it's going to be based on that. Have you loved as I have loved you, as I have loved you? Now, there's a lot salvifically to say about, what is our capacity to love like Jesus? And that is a whole other topic. This is not a works passage where he's going to be like, oh, well, you didn't visit this many people in prison. You didn't. It's not about that. Once again, in all of the sermons, Jesus is showing us how much we need his redemptive and restorative power. Because truly, we can't love like Jesus until we understand what it is to be loved like Jesus. And so, before the Son of Man ever comes, before he ever comes for a second time, the way he finishes and fulfills his work the first time is Jesus loves us, even to the point of death and death on the cross. We cannot love like Jesus until we have been loved by Jesus. So if you want to be ready for the judgment, if you want to be ready for the second coming, if you want to be ready for the battle of Armageddon, start by understanding Jesus' love for you. Start by understanding Jesus' love for you. And once that starts to fill you up, let that flow out into your love for other people. It's not just a Sunday school lesson. This is eternally important. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for giving us an opportunity to get into your word and to study one of the most important teachings of your Son. Lord, help us to carry this command to love one another, to love the city, and to love you with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength into an eternal understanding. And Lord, help us most of all to be loved by you so that we can love others. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Don't just answer the questions for next week. Experience the questions. Have a great day, y'all. Thank you.